Well, thank you. Whoops, hold on here. There you go. Thank you, Stephen. It's really just an incredible honor to be here. Stephen is one of those people who Project Play and my work is built upon. Uh, Kevin McLaughlin, there are several people in this room who have made possible the work that we have done at the Aspen Institute with my team and a set of stakeholders and leagues and media companies and Nikes and Under Armours and competitors, NBC Sports, all these folks who now sit around our table thinking about how to reimagine sports in the United States. So the name of my talk is How to Win at Hockey, which is ironic because I've never played hockey before. Right? In fact, I grew up in Florida, pre-Panthers, playing football and golf and tennis and all sorts of sports, and never even thought about playing hockey. So I want to put that on the table. I am not a hockey expert. But what I have done, I spent 20 years doing, is understanding sports systems, effective sports systems. We've studied a dozen or so of the leading sports systems around the world. I've gone to Australia and try to understand the Australia Institute model of identifying and developing athletes. France to understand their soccer model. Of the Dominican Republic to understand why so many baseball players come out of there. We've looked at the policies, the practices, the partnerships that elevate effective models within the United States, and we've thought very, very deeply about how to drive systems level change in the provision and the delivery of sports in the U.S. And we have a growing international footprint, 13 or so Aspen Institute affiliates. Romania, Mexico in particular have their own Project Play initiatives, which is great. And we want to do more internationally as well. So again, it's incredible honor for me to be with you here today, and I've already learned so much in the past 24 hours. So I hope this talk pumps a few big ideas into the bloodstream, but I also want to kind of pull you into it as I deliver this, and I really look forward to the conversation coming out of it and in the panel talk this afternoon. So what I think we can say is, what I'd like to talk to you about here today is what I think we can all agree is the largest and most important layer in the youth hockey ecosystem, the foundation upon which really everything else is built. International play, Olympics, professional, college hockey, all of it. Beer league as well, right? Beer league where we, it's like the last institution in certainly American society where liberals and conservatives come together and work together to solve real problems like how to beat the power play, right? And then we go to our kids' games and we lose our minds. It just gets insane, and that's where we drop the gloves, and that's where the haymakers start flying, right? I mean, maybe you've seen it on YouTube. This is probably certainly more of a problem in the U.S. and Canada than it is maybe elsewhere in the world. But seems like every week there's some new YouTube video of parents just acting crazy. I think my favorite was the two referees who were squaring off against each other, ref against ref, showing that youth sports has become something of a jungle out there, actually. So, and the interesting thing is we all this emotion of anger. Studies actually show that parents, 50% of parents, feel the emotion of anger watching their kids play. It might be at the way they got treated on the ice. It might be at the coach. It might be at yourself for not hiring a private trainer to help your kid play the game a little bit better. But it's just definitely an emotional cauldron out there. And youth hockey hasn't always been this intense. Youth sports hasn't always been this intense. We've always had the hockey dad, yes, absolutely. And in the U.S. at least, hockey was the first sport to embrace the travel team culture. Maybe necessarily so because there's a limited amount of ice and you had to kind of aggregate kids and bring them to a different place. But in the 1970s and 1980s, it was the first sport, before basketball, before baseball, before soccer, to create the travel team culture. as opposed to just in-house leagues. But today we have 8-year-olds with national rankings, and we have families taking out second home loans to cover their kids' hockey activities. And it's the most expensive sport, according to our research, of all sports out there, in the U.S. at least. And you have parents now who are looking for ROI, return on investment, access to college opportunities, whether it be a scholarship or preferential admission to a selected university or college, or professional team roster spots down the line. I spent, as Stephen mentioned, I spent 20 years as a reporter, an investigative reporter for ESPN, show called Outside the Lines, E60, worked with the magazine.com. And while my colleagues were, covering the NHL or NBA or NFL and reporting out that news, I really became much more interested in the trends that were reshaping, youth sports in the U.S. The rise of youth sport tourism that put heads in beds, and as cities really began to understand the economic value of bringing families to town. I saw the growth of hockey among girls as gender equity laws became enforced. I saw the move away from more informal play forms of sport like pond hockey, and more toward this early specialization model. The shift from the idea of Wayne Gretzky and how he grew up to more Sidney Crosby, and the shift in thinking among parents as they saw these type of anecdotes, these players come through the system, and started to think to themselves, well, maybe if we start early in diapers and we load our kid up with 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, then maybe our kid has a chance to do the same. So I knew I had to write a book on all this, and 384 pages later, I had one. It's called Game On, the All-American Race to Make Champions of Our Children. It was really the first journalistic deep dive of our sport ecosystem. Not the first book on youth sport, but like looking at the ecosystem as a whole. The year was 2008, and the book was really the canary in the coal mine, because the extreme is now the mainstream. We know that from Project Play, the Aspen Institute initiative that I helped create back in 2013 to address the challenges that were described in Game On. We work with many of the leading organizations in sports, from the National Recreation Park Association to, like I said, the leagues, Dick's Sporting Goods, healthcare providers like the Hospital for Special Surgery, the world's top orthopedic hospital, insurance companies like Players Health, some of the top NGBs, USTA and U.S. Olympic Committee as well. So competitors sometimes, foundations like the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. We bring them together, and we develop insights and ideas on how to build healthy children and communities through sports. The 63 by 30 reference you see on there stands for 63% of youth in the United States playing sports by the year 2030. The federal government actually started collecting data back in 2016 on the percentage of kids who play organized sports. We didn't really have any solid data, at least government data before that. It was baselined at about 58%, fell down to 56%. Just prior to the pandemic. Pandemic hits, fell down to 49%. We are now back up to 55%, which is good, which really shows that there is a lot of organizations and people who both believe in sports and are putting programs in place to make sure that we don't suffer in the same way that we did coming out of the last the last big disruption, which was the economic recession of 2008 to 2011 or so, where the house leagues, the rec leagues really tailed off, the travel team environment took over, and we saw overall participation dip and not really recover. But that number would be higher if youth sports today weren't such a lift. Our research within Project Play shows that in the U.S., the average parent today spends 3 hours and 23 minutes a day on their kids' sport activities. Think about that. 3 hours and 23 minutes a day. We're talking about planning, watching, washing clothes, traveling sometimes halfway across the country to play a team from back home. It's kind of absurd in a way, right? And that's not just that's just the average, 3 hours and 23 minutes. That's not the parent, who's really meeting the demands of an intense, advanced hockey club environment. In Game On, I found a hockey family outside of Boston that had spent more than $100,000 that year on their 3 kids' sport activities. And my mind was kind of blown, like $100,000 on like your kids' sports. Special, coaches to help you with how you skate, and 2 clubs and in 2 different states, and it was a lot. And I was just like, man, that's something else. But today, it seems like these families are like everywhere. The amount of money that's being spent. In fact, in aggregate, again, according to our research within Project Play, parents spend north of $40 billion a year on youth sports. Okay, let's put that in perspective. That's about 6 times the amount of money that's rolling through the NHL in any given year. It is a huge industry. Parents in other countries spend less, and that's good, in part because the government underwrites it. The structures are sometimes set up differently, but the environment can also be pretty intense as well. So how did this happen? How do we go from orange slices and in-house leagues to a monster industry backed by private equity? Well, the downstream rewards for athletic success have grown. Pro salaries at the professional level, in the NHL and elsewhere, they've blown up. Then there's the lure of athletic scholarships in the U.S., where colleges now recruit internationally. In the early 1990s, NCAA member schools handed out about $300 million a year in athletic aid at the Division I and Division II level. There's, in theory, no athletic scholarships in Division III. Well, today, hockey-related aid alone at the NCAA level is worth north of $100 million. That's just one sport out of dozens. And now we've got this shift in the NCAA rules that allow players coming from junior hockey in Canada to access that support. And we all know that's going to be a major challenge to the Canadian hockey system. Now, the odds of getting a full ride remain long. They really do. But that's a lot. $100 million is a lot of chum that is thrown into the waters of youth hockey. And it's making the parents a little bit crazy, right? The fish, a little bit crazy. Secondly, over the past 2 decades, the evidence base for why your kid should play sports at any level has grown. Active kids simply do better in life. They're less likely to be obese. They're more likely to stay in school. They're less likely to suffer mental health challenges, more likely to go to college, and then as they grow into adulthood, kids who are physically active suffer a range of chronic diseases much less often than those who've been sedentary, including 13 types of cancer. They become active parents, and as active parents, they're good role models for their kids. And because of that, they're twice as likely to have active kids themselves. So we know, parents know, now fully, they appreciate it better than ever, especially coming out of COVID, that we can trigger this virtuous cycle if we can simply get kids off the couch and off their phones without running them into the ground. So we do whatever it takes to keep them in the game, whatever the game. I had little interest, as did my wife, Christine, who's in the back there, and our eldest son, Cole, leaving, the local rec league to play travel soccer in 2nd grade. But we went with it, right? We went with it because it seemed like the only path to playing in high school. We looked at the high school team, the kids who were playing, and all of them were playing club at a pretty early age, right? realized the bullet train was leaving the station, and we didn't want our kid left off. So we just kind of went with it, not as a move to create an advantage on other kids, but just simply to preserve an option of having a sustained experience and a good experience into high school. We see this, of course, in youth hockey as well, maybe even more so. I know the families in the town where we raised our kids, Burlington, Connecticut, the hockey families were probably the most intense of them all. Smaller group, but just as intense. And this is the core of the problem, I would say. And this is across sports, not just in youth hockey, but across youth sports, certainly in America. There's a perceived lack of options. We've created this up or out model for youth sports that says unless you pay more and get more serious, your kid's out. And what we really need, having studied this space for 10 years or so, is to revitalize these in-town leagues, right? So it's so great to hear about what the Dallas Stars are doing, what other clubs are doing to recognize this opportunity. Even the business rationale about having local community-based play. But most of us can remember this, classmates playing with classmates. We just need teams to revitalize these needs. We need to have coaches who can deliver a great experience. People who actually know what they're doing, right? And can create an alternative to these early forming travel teams that sort of trigger this FOMO that parents have. We need more options for more kids who get pushed out of the youth hockey arms race and the youth sports arms race in general. Not just the low-income kid, but the late starter, the late bloomer, and the kid who just wants to have fun. This is not an unsolvable problem. It just takes leadership and courage to introduce policies that prioritize community-based play. Again, that's why I love what the Stars are doing. The commitment to entry-level hockey, not just advanced teams, rookie programs through adulthood, access without barriers. So congratulations, Dwight, if you're in the room. Is Dwight here? No. Okay. Well, I'll share his thanks later. I love what the Columbus Blue Jackets are doing. They have invested in a citywide program, boys and girls, aligned it with ADM, really made it age appropriate, been very aware of injury prevention, making an experience where kids would come back. I love what the NHL is doing with street hockey and putting that into different environments, non-traditional environments around the country. It doesn't always have to be ice. It can be, you can enjoy this game, of course, in many different forms. And we're seeing that when you put it in places like a Boys and Girls Club in Alabama, their kids will actually want to play. We did one of our studies in East Harlem, New York, 50% Latino community, and asked kids, what do you want to play? What do you know? Hockey was one of the sports they wanted to play. And so, fortunately, the NHL and Madison Square Garden said, well, great opportunity. Let's get floor hockey into the PE curriculum. We're going to train up the teachers. We're going to give them the equipment, and we're going to engage kids at scale. You can actually go in terms of kids who have access to this game if you're just creative and entrepreneurial and you'll listen to what kids want. I love what they're doing in Minnesota, what they've long done in Minnesota, which is, the state of hockey in the U.S., where the state helped fund rinks in cities across the state with the expectation that they will serve kids locally. In Minnesota, after age 10, you can't play, at least part of the year, it can't play for a team that's in a town other than your own. It's an insistence on having community-based play be part of the anchor. Now, some people will call that un-American, government overreach, but I call it policy that prioritizes participation and performance. Minnesota, it's no coincidence that not only have they produced more youth hockey players than any other state, it's producing the best elite talent in the U.S. at least, more so than states like Michigan that have more fully allowed the free market to do whatever the free market is going to do, which is run wild. And hockey has gotten much more expensive and much more elitist. We all want progress. But we can't rely on individual clubs, the innovators, the problem solvers like the Dallas Stars to do this alone, right? We can't just depend on them to drive progress. To boost the quality and the quantity of players, we as national leaders and international leaders need to rally around what I would argue are two frameworks that can create shared expectations, lift all boats, and drive systems level change in the delivery of programs everywhere. One framework, of course, is LTAD or ADM, which we've heard about today. In the US, and Stephen Norris was at the core of putting together this whole model along with Kevin and Ken Martell and others. The ADM, offers clarity. I've been a huge fan of this. It offers clarity of what needs to happen at each stage of a child's engagement in the sport based on the evidence, from age 6 to 9, 9 to 12, and so on, all the way to adulthood. Practice game ratios, the role of multi-sport play, when to specialize, what you want from coaches to be trained in at each level. With the NHL's financial support, USA Hockey pioneered this model more than a decade ago in response to high attrition rates and rising concerns about head injuries. They adjusted their coach training practices, created in-rink materials, and backed ADM with policy. Cross-ice at the entry level, and no national championships at the Pee Wee level. Actually got rid of it, and no body checking at the Pee Wee levels, at least in games. Taught in practices, not in games. They hired regional trainers like Bob Mancini. Is Bob in the room by any chance here? Where's Bob? Hey, there's my man, Bob. They were smart enough to hire people like Bob to go rink to rink to rink to rink and help these people, help folks understand how to adapt this new model, right? You need that level of hands-on support to do this. I wrote about all this in ESPN magazine a few years ago. And again, the NHL has played an important role. With the Players Association, they created the Industry Growth Fund, which has invested $190 million over the past decade in learn to skate programs in all 32 league markets. So the results? Participation in the U.S. has grew over the subsequent decade. No easy thing to do given, the scarcity of rinks and the disappearing outdoor ice in many communities. Numbers took a hit during COVID, but now they're back up. And that's because of the NHL's Learn to Skate program and ADM-aligned local providers like the Kalamazoo Optimist Hockey Association in Michigan. Despite the way the hockey in that state is structured, KOHA, as it is called, has grown registration every year since 2012, except for the COVID years. 800 this year, making KOHA one of the largest associations in Michigan. The club's mantra is as many as possible for as long as possible, which is a phrase many of you have heard. They've embraced it, run with it. And that doesn't mean, all year long. In fact, KOHA encourages families to pursue other sports and deliberately offers no programming in June, July, and August to allow its players to enjoy other activities and their families. KOHA believes that allowing players to take time off over the summer helps fire their passion upon a return to hockey in the fall. They ask families to trust them in their approach and that they're adhering to a long-term model that will result in overall excellence for the club. The mission of KOHA is to provide a safe and inclusive environment for youth of all skill levels to learn, develop, and excel in the sport of hockey. But that doesn't come at the cost of talent development. On the contrary, KOHA has just experienced the most successful decade in the 60-year history of the association. As a Tier 2 club, it has advanced many players to Tier 1 hockey, utilizing a family-first and community-based approach to youth sports. Since then, the quality of U.S. players has also improved from the elite youth and national team levels. And of course, some of these players go on to the pros. When ADM was introduced, only 202 players in the NHL were from the U.S. Now it's over 300 with a high of Sorry, I had a little bit of a woke up with a cold this morning. Now it's over 300 with a high of 324 in 2023. The players today they're more skilled. They're more able to solve problems with their skates and wrists than in the past when physical play, when hockey looked a little more like American football, was prioritized. They're more, frankly, European. But I would argue that we need a companion to ADM. ADM is amazing, LT8A, incredible, but we need a framework that sits beneath that and serves as something of a building code, a minimum building code for youth sports. Not the gold standard, just a minimum set of conditions to meet if you're serving youth, any youth, ages 17 or under, whether it's a Learn to Skate program or an elite academy. In 2021, our program created such a framework. It's called the Children's Bill of Rights in Sports. Its principles are drawn from and aligned with the 1989 UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. How many people in this room have heard of the UNCRC? Raise your hand. Okay, not many. So this is, again, the most signed and ratified treaty in the history of the world. In fact, the only nation that has not ratified it would be, any guess? That was too easy. Someone's supposed to say North Korea or Libya or no, yeah, it's the U.S. It's the U.S. because we don't like to have everybody tell us how we're going to raise our kids, or at least some people don't. But we have signed it. We just haven't ratified it through the Senate. Regardless, a lot of these principles are embraced within the U.S. and really all of our societies. And the statement recognizes that all children have a right to play sports, regardless of the background or ability. And what that means is that children have, that organizations should make every effort to accommodate their interest to participate and to play with peers from diverse backgrounds. It means that providers should develop policies, practices, and partnerships to include youth from underrepresented populations and create programs that both meet and stimulate youth interest in sports. That nonprofits and other groups that benefit from the use of public facilities have a special duty to protect the right of all children to participate. So I actually want to kind of throw it out here. Is Kim in the room? Kim Davis in the room right now? Okay. We'll come back to her later. But I mean, the NHL has done a terrific job at sort of thinking about some of the underrepresented populations in the room or in our communities. Second, that all children have the right to safe and healthy environments. And that means to play in settings free from all forms of abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual, to hazing, violence, and neglect. They must be provided safe and inclusive playing facilities and equipment. While the physical nature of sports means all risk cannot be eliminated, programs should take precautions to protect youth from harm and dangerous situations. And at all times, the best interest of the child should prevail. These are words that didn't just come out of nowhere. Again, they are drawn from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is a general statement that says, if you are a human being, then these are the rights that you have. What we did is we said, okay, what does this mean in a sport context? So words like the best interest of the child should prevail are core to that. Third, that all children have the right to qualified program leaders. That means children have the right to play under the care of coaches and other adults who pass background checks. It means that coaches should receive training at a minimum in general concepts of coaching youth, sports-specific training, the emotional needs of children, injury prevention, CPR and first aid, and abuse prevention. That children and parents and caregivers deserve to know program policies and procedures in these areas. Number 4, all children have the right to developmentally appropriate play. The children have the right to play at a level commensurate with their physical, their mental, and their emotional maturity, and their emerging athletic ability. Roster sizes, rules, and equipment should be adapted to those levels. They should not be subjected to inappropriate pressure or exploitation. Reasonable effort should be made to recruit and accommodate youth with disabilities. and that all children should be treated as young people first and athletes second. And so as I hope we go through this, I hope you're thinking about your own programs and how well they align and what you might be able to do more to honor the rights of kids. Number 5, all children have the right to share in the planning and delivery of activities. This is about voice. Children have the right to share their viewpoints with coaches and program administrators and for their insights to be incorporated into activities. They have the right to identify sport options of their own interest, and especially with younger participants, consideration should be given to how much they want to train. You should be provided ample space for free play and to enjoy other sport, cultural, and family activities. Is Jadine somewhere in the room here? There she is. Jadine and I had a great conversation yesterday about this point that I hadn't even really thought of, but can you talk for a quick second about your son and how this becomes relevant and help him?
So my son, who's 14, he's actually in basketball, and he is wanting to play at a very high level. Anyway, he made one team, which is quite a tough team, and we need to give our answer as a family as if he was going to join that team. We needed to give the answer by Wednesday. But he wanted to try out for another team as well that all of his friends were probably going to join, and we wouldn't be able to try out for that team until Saturday. And so I said to my son, as he's struggling with this decision, and of course I had to pay a deposit of $1,400, right, by the Wednesday. I said, you know what, Ronan? And I'd coach the UN Bill of Rights. I said, you reserve the right to change your mind. So if you want to say yes to this team right now, because we have to keep your spot, but you change your mind on Saturday, you receive that right. And he immediately relaxed. He exhaled because he realized he actually had a choice. So I think this is a fantastic initiative. Thank you, Tom.
Which is the challenge to the culture, right? We think that a kid's on our team and we sort of own them, right? Just for the ability to organize our practices and know how our teams are put together. But it is important that young people have choice and they have voice. They have more than we're giving them right now. So how do we incorporate their point of view? Because the whole goal is to keep them involved in the game. It's not actually to win that game on Saturday. Keep them in the game, make it a great experience, develop healthy habits for life. Next, we have that all children have the right to an equal opportunity for personal growth. That kids have the right to have programs invest equally in them, free from discrimination based on any personal or family characteristic. Policies on minimum playing time in games should be established in recognition of the evolving capacities of youth, with a bias, especially at the younger ages, toward roughly equal playing time over the course of a season. Programs should create balanced teams where possible and be judicious in creating competition formats that favor early bloomers to the exclusion of others. Is Kevin McLaughlin in the room here? Kevin, maybe you can reflect a little bit on how ADM intersects with this framework of human rights, because ADM is a best practices format. But what runs through your mind?
Well, I think what runs through my mind is that we owe this to kids to have age-appropriate, age-specific programming, and Steve was one of the first people to enlighten me about that. You know, I thought as a hockey leader or hockey coach, my job was to put the best practice together and teach the skills and, develop the best team to win on Saturday. But the more and more I was around experts and child development people, I realized that we need to create an environment where kids can excel as people first, and then athletes second, and then hockey players third. And if we can look at what is age appropriate, what is child development appropriate, whether it's the playing environment, whether it's the equipment that's age appropriate, whether it's the number of trainings per week, whether it's the approach that we take to training, We all acknowledge that most people aren't going to make a living playing hockey, right? We can have a coffee and 100% of us agree on that. So shouldn't our priority be to use this sport that we all think is the greatest sport in the world as an avenue to develop people and kids especially in today's challenging world? Get them away from the video games, get away from the couch, get them away from the challenges and troubles that present themselves that we never had to face, and use our sport as the vehicle to create good relationships, to a healthier lifestyle, healthier physical activity, teamwork. I mean, I think our sport with having a locker room is one of the greatest dynamics that any sport can offer. The work ethic, the discipline, the problem solving that our game presents, and just use those avenues and understand that that's our real mission. And the elite athletes will rise to the top. You heard Henrik last night talk about that. The elite athletes will survive us all, and they'll find their way. We just have to screw it up less and provide a better environment, and just follow these principles that have been around for years and years. Listen to the experts like Steve and you and others, and deliver to children what they need through the avenue of hockey. That's my philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I would encourage everyone to do is think about developmentally appropriate play. Think about concepts like what Kevin just talked about as not just a nice to have or an option or an alternative to the way you're currently doing it, but something you absolutely should be doing. This is, as a child, you are born with certain human rights, and you need to check these boxes. Everyone needs to check these boxes, and it's hard. And nobody's very few are perfect at it, but just understand that as a human being, you have certain rights. Kids have certain rights in sports, so think about developmentally appropriate play. Think about a commitment to equal opportunity for growth as something that is fundamental, and not just maybe I should build that into my program. Number 7, all children have the right to be treated with dignity. They have the right to participate in environments that promote the values of sportsmanship, of respect for opponents, officials in the game. That they have the right to make mistakes and fail without fear. This is what's so great about video games, right? We all complain about how much kids play. Well, guess what? That's an environment where you can fail all the time and nobody yells at you when you mess up. Policy should be established and enforced to prevent bullying behavior by coaches, parents, spectators, and teammates. Education on these matters should be provided to them in a variety of formats and languages. And finally, yes, children have the right to enjoy themselves. They have the right to participate in activities that they consider fun, and which foster the development of friendships, the primary motivations for many to participate. We know that from our surveys of youth. When you ask them why they play sports, the top 2 reasons that they say are fun and to play with their friends. Winning matters. It barely cracks the top 5. It's at number 5. They want to test themselves. They want to compete, but we need to remember this is why they typically play sports. Coaches and administrators should create the conditions to help them find comfort and happiness, and which in turn can facilitate a love of sport, self-learning, mastery, and sustained engagement. Joy isn't just something we should aspire to again. It's a core feature of great programs like Koha, the Kalamazoo program that I mentioned, and indeed the world's leading sports systems. Norway, I covered the Winter Olympics for NBC Sports in 2018. Norway finished at the top of the medal count, 39 medals. The U.S. had 28. Norway, a country the size of Minnesota. I'm like, how did that happen exactly? So I went to Norway, worked with the architect of their system, because they re-architected everything back in the 1990s. Traveled around the country. Really kind of came to understand their system. Came back, wrote a piece for the New York Times on it. And I came to realize that core was them building a children's Bill of Rights in sports. That's where the idea of our Bill of Rights in sports came from. CORE was building this Bill of Rights in sports back in the 1990s, and they did the same thing. They looked at the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, interpreted it in a sport context and a Norwegian context, and created a consensus from the Olympic Committee to their national sport organizations to representatives from the 13 or so different states, or the size of counties, and other key stakeholders in their system around the idea of that children should have a certain type of foundational experience. And they put a motto at the center of it. It's called the joy of sport for all. And today, Norway may not be a hockey powerhouse, but 9 out of 10 kids come through sport clubs in that country. And the country tops the medal count it continues to top the medal count in the Winter Olympics. And they produce plenty of talent, world-class talent in sports like soccer, track and field, tennis, handball, even my favorite sport, beach volleyball. Again, not bad for a nation the size of Minnesota. Oh, and Norway is also among the healthiest and happiest nations in the world right now. That's the promise of our Bill of Rights, which, good news here, has now been endorsed by most national governing bodies of sports in the U.S., including USA Hockey, plus more than 500 mayors, governors, grassroots organizations, athletes like Steph Curry and Alex Morgan. And this year we secured the endorsement of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, and the National Recreation and Parks Association. This is huge in terms of creating scale around this idea. The next step is to align activities in communities and school sports to help facility operators, including rink operators, use what we call the power of the permit to drive safety, access, and quality in youth programs that rent these spaces to different programs. And we're developing a multi-year plan around that, so stay tuned. But I would say let's not make this just a U.S. activation. This is the question I want to pose to everyone here today. How do we build hockey models across the world in every country that are anchored in the human rights of children? Can you rally your national federation? Can you rally your key stakeholders to adopt the Bill of Rights as a building code where you live, a floor that creates shared expectations across your hockey ecosystem? Every country here in this room, again, has signed the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So why not recognize these rights in hockey models so that we can get and keep more than a couple million kids a year playing this incredible game? Why not use the human rights of youth as a bulwark to fortify the game and as any number of forces pressure test and challenge the prevailing models, everything from technology to private equity, consolidation to legal rulings. Look, we know what winning looks like at the Olympic level. We know what it looks like at the professional level. It's the Stanley Cup, right? It's gold medals hanging around the necks of the winners, of delirious adults. But what I'm talking with you about today is youth participation, development, joy. This is how we win at hockey in our society, in our communities, and in our nations. By honoring the rights of all children to play, by having the supply of experiences meet the demand for them, and by putting the youth, including youth voice, back in youth sports, and by building a new scoreboard to measure success, one that where one number represents the percentage of kids playing hockey, and another, if we can measure it, and we're going to try within our program, to quantify the amount of joy that children are experiencing playing. Because this is what will make them fans for life. This is what will create great players for life. This is what will grow the sport. And we want those numbers to grow every single year. So I wish you the best. And please know that we here within my program are happy to help as best as we can. So thank you for your time.